Okay, the kids and I here at school have been learning about pure substances and mixtures. And so we learned that if we have salt, that is sodium and chlorine, sodium chloride, I cannot separate the sodium from the chlorine. They're together. If we have water, that is H2O, I cannot separate the hydrogen from the oxygen. They have bonded together into a molecule. But I can separate the different parts of birdseed. I could pick the pepperoni off of my pizza. I could pick the onions out of my salad. So those would be mixtures. And so what we have right here is a mixture of salt and pepper in this lovely little pile here on my desk. And so I have a challenge for you. How would you separate the salt from the pepper? So if you have kids at home that you're doing this with, you might want to pause for a second. If you're my students, pause for a second, come up with some ideas that you're going to jot down for how we're going to separate those. If you've seen the TikTok, the kids would do this. The salt is separated from the pepper. And while that's a lot of fun, there are ways that we can separate this mixture. So put your thinking cap on and jot down some ideas. You might want to pause. Okay, if you've got some ideas, I want to share with you some of the ideas that the kids at school had. They know from watching some things on the internet that pepper floats. So they thought if we put this in water that the pepper would all float to the top. And that is true, that pepper does want to float because pepper is actually peppercorns. It's very woody. These little seeds are from the pepper plant. And so when we are using a grinder, what's coming out is basically kind of like sawdust. Pepper and sawdust are very similar. It just has a good taste to it. So if you're sprinkling that right on top of there, most of the time it does want to float. So that was one idea. And the other ideas they had all had to do with picking these things out very carefully or lightly blowing on this. And so when we do that, unfortunately, a lot of our salt wants to go too. So while that worked a little bit to get some of the lighter pieces of pepper, that didn't work out so well. So I challenged the kids to come up with a way that they could move the pepper away from the salt with a balloon. So if you've got an idea about how you might do that, think about that for a second. I'll move this out of my way. This will be a great party trick at the next birthday party you go to, where there is food and balloons. You can do this. So I got my balloon all good and staticky. The kids really liked this part. And then watch and listen. The pepper is sticking to the balloon. There's a few pieces of salt in there too, but for the most part, we are getting a lot of pepper. So if we spread it around a little bit, keep doing it, we can pick up more and more pepper. So that was a lot of fun. So now that we played around with that for a while, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna try that water trick that the kids mentioned. So I'm gonna scoop up our mixture here, and I'm gonna scoop it into this container of water. Okay, and my handy dandy stirring stick, Ticonderoga number 2. Mixing that all around in there, and what happens to the salt? A lot of kids would say it disappeared, but it's still in there. Yes, it's still in there. That is still salty, so it is still in there. And we can see that the pepper's in there, and it did not stay floating like they thought that it would. It is possible for wood to float, but when it gets a little bit waterlogged, it's also going to sink. And we do have a lot of sunken pepper in there. So how are we gonna get it out now? So they had ideas of using spoons, and that would take a while. And then they had the idea of using some type of a kitchen colander or a sorter. And so I do have this screen mesh here. This has holes in it that are a little bit smaller than a kitchen screen in our windows, but we're gonna put it on top of this container here. And we're going to use these paper towels as a filter in there. So I'm only gonna use one. Make it go fast. Oh. So I'm going to line that in there in much the way that you would do the same at home if you are trying to make coffee. So then I'm going to pour this in there. Now, don't be alarmed. This overhangs the edge. It's going to make a mess. My custodians are used to me. Luckily, pretty good at cleaning up my own messes. But it is going to overflow out the sides. That's all right. So it trickles through. I'm going to take this paper towel out of here. And I'm going to lay it down. And you can see that we have a lot of pepper. And if I move this, you can see that we have salt water that does not have pepper in it. That's great. We successfully removed the pepper from our salt. However, now we do not have salt. What are we going to do next? Now, this stumped a lot of the kids. They were not sure about what to do next. They're like, well, you can't get it out of there. It doesn't take them very long, though, to start thinking about it and thinking about glasses of water that they might have left in their bedroom, that they came back later and it's all white and crusty in the bottom because there is calcium and lime in our water. So if we let this sit and we let it evaporate, then the moisture will go out into the air, and what we will have left in the bottom of here will be our salt. It would take a lot of patience. Can we speed that process up? Think about that for a second. How can I make that happen faster? How will it evaporate faster? Couple of different ways. If I pour it into a cake pan so it's more spread out, more surface area is going to let it evaporate. If I put a heat or a fan on it, that's going to make it evaporate faster. If I put it in a pan, it will evaporate very quickly, and what I will be left with will be the salt crystals behind. Now, we're going to be growing salt crystals later this year when we learn about rocks and minerals, and when we do that, we're going to learn what makes big crystals and what makes small crystals, because speed does have something to do about that. So planting or do with that. So that's a little thing to think about to make you look forward to the spring, but that is how we are going to successfully remove the pepper from the salt and get our salt back. Few steps involved, but we can separate this mixture. I hope you had fun with this.